All right. Good morning, everybody. My name is Councillor Paul Ainsley, and I'm the chair of the General Government and Licensing Committee. The clerk has confirmed that we have quorum, so I would like to call meeting number 24 to order. Today's meeting is being held by video conference. City staff are also connecting to the meeting by video conference. As City Hall remains closed, the public will continue to participate electronically and can watch the meeting streaming live on YouTube at youtube.com/Toronto City Council Live. The clerk staff have connected all registered speakers to the meeting by audio. The list of speakers can be viewed online by visiting the General Government Licensing Committee's page at toronto.ca/council and clicking the speakers box for today's meeting. Ask for everyone's patience as we experience any delays or technical problems during the meeting. Members, the City Clerk has provided all agenda materials on toronto.ca/council and on the Clerk's meeting portal. Clerk's IT staff will be available to you remotely if you need help with any of your electronic devices. I would like to remind staff to keep their mics muted and their videos turned off unless they need to answer questions or speak to the committee. This will make it easier for me as the chair and for those watching on YouTube to observe members as they participate in the debate and vote on items. Committee members, please keep your mic muted unless you wish to question staff or speak to an item, and please ensure your video is turned on. As part of each agenda item, I will ask members to raise their hand or unmute their mic if they wish to speak to staff. I will then create a speakers list and will call on members when it is their turn to speak. When voting on an item or a motion, I ask that members ensure that they keep their video on and to raise their hand to please indicate their vote. Members, I'd also like to remind you that you must still submit and approve your motions by email. Staff are available at gglc@toronto.ca to help with motions. If there's any visiting members of council attending the meeting today, I encourage you to turn on your video so I know you're present and you can give you the opportunity to ask questions of staff or speak. This will also assist the clerk staff to record attendance for the meeting. And I would like to present our land acknowledgement that states, although we're in different locations and meeting remotely today, the committee would like to acknowledge that the land we are meeting on is the traditional territories of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty Number 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. At this point, I will ask if there's any declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. If there are, if you could please raise your hand. Seeing none. Members, before I call for a motion to confirm the minutes of our last meeting, I wish to draw committee's attention to an item for our April 26th meeting. I've been informed by the clerk that committee's decision on item GL 22.12 has been corrected to reflect the committee adopted the recommendations in the revised staff report. The revised staff report was posted on April 22nd in advance of our meeting on April 26th, and the revised recommendations were before the committee at our meeting. The clerk is advised that due to an error, the committee decision does not reflect the correct recommendations adopted by the committee. The decision has been corrected, but as we've already adopted the minutes for that meeting, I will now call for a motion to readopt the April 26 minutes as corrected. Can I have a motion to confirm the minutes of our meeting on April 26, 2021? Moved by Councillor Holiday. All in favor? Carried. Can I have a motion to confirm the minutes of our meeting on May 27th, 2021? Councillor Mantas, all in favor? Carried. Members, we'll now review the agenda, the items on our agenda, starting with item 24.1. I understand there is a new item of business to introduce, which we will do during our agenda review. Sorry, wrong click. Hold on, my apologies. Hold on a moment. There we go. All right, item number 1 is a hearing for 945 apportionment of property taxes as of June 29th, 2021. It's a public hearing. I will come back to that one. Number 2 is cancellation, reduction, or refund of property taxes as of June 29th, 2021. It's also a public hearing scheduled for 9:45. I will hold that in my name. Number 3 is the write-off of uncollectible property taxes from the tax roll. Anybody like to hold this item? Can I have somebody move the recommendations, please? Councillor Mantas, all in favor? Carried. Number 4 is the 2020 annual report from the controller. Anybody like to hold this item? Can I have someone move the recommendations? Councillor Nunziata, all in favor? Carried. Number 5 is the annual update on Omers as it relates to the city's employer contributions. We have a speaker on this item, so we will hold that item. And a presentation on number 5 as well. Number 6, Toronto Fire Department Superannuation and Benefit Fund Funding Valuation Report as at December 31st, 2020. Anybody like to hold this item? Can I have somebody move the recommendations? Councillor Mantas, all in favor? Carried. Number 7 is the award of negotiated requests for proposal Ariba document number 262-555-2649 to Cleanway Building Maintenance Services Incorporated for the provision of custodial services at Union Station. Somebody like to hold this? Somebody like to move the recommendations? Councillor Holidays moving the recommendations. All in favor? Carried. Number 8 is the agreement with Toronto Event Centre Incorporated. There's a confidential attachment with this item. Anybody like to hold it? Would somebody like to move the recommendations? Councillor Speaker Nunziata is moving the recommendations. All in favor? Carried. Number 9, amendment to blanket contract number 470-23700 to MetScan Canada Limited. Somebody like to move the recommendations? Councillor Holidays moving the recommendations. All in favor? Carried. Number 10, amendment to purchase order 6048526 issued to Atlas Constructors Incorporated for the construction of the Clark Centre for the Arts. This is actually in my ward. I'm going to move the recommendations. All in favor? Carried. Number 11 is a non-competitive contract to purchase rear-mounted aerial apparatus for Toronto Fire Services with SafeTech Emergency Vehicles Limited and reporting of emergency purchases of aerial devices. Somebody like to move the recommendations? Councillor Mantas, all in favor? Carried. Number 12 is the expropriation of a portion of 350 Progress Avenue for Toronto Paramedic Services Station Access. This is in Ward 21. Can I have somebody move the recommendations? Councillor Filion, all in favor? Carried. Number 13, acquisition of 10 properties on Old Weston Road, St. Clair West Transportation Master Plan. This is in Ward 9. Somebody like to move the recommendations? Speaker Nunziata is moving the recommendations. All in favor? Carried. Number 14, Downsview East Lands, release of restrictive covenants and amendment of easement in Ward 6. Somebody like to move the recommendations? Councillor Holidays moving the recommendations. All in favor? Carried. Number 15, conveyance of lands to the Toronto Region Conservation Authority for the Lower Don flood protection in Ward 13. Councillor Mantas is moving the recommendations. All in favor? Carried. Number 16, category management strategic sourcing update. This is here to be received for information. Would somebody like to move the recommendation? Councillor Holiday, all in favor? Carried. Number 17, cost comparison of custodial services at city buildings. The recommendation is to receive this for information. Would somebody like to move the recommendation? Councillor Filion, all in favor? Carried. Number 18 is building digital autonomy in the city's digital infrastructure. So to receive for information, would somebody like to move the recommendations? Speaker Nunziata, all in favor? Carried. Number 19, response to MM 25.6, entitled Keeping Sailors Afloat, options to amend existing lease agreements with community sailing clubs. Should we do an on-site visit today? Somebody like to move the recommendations? Councillor Matlow, all in favor? Carried. And then we have an item of new business. Councillor Filion, I understand you have an item of new business to introduce.
Yes, thank you. It's just a correction of a report that went through previously, not a correction, but something that wasn't included in a recommendation. It was only in the body of the report. So staff have asked that it be introduced and adopted. It relates to a something we've dealt with here before, which is the new facility in Willowdale to help out new food entrepreneurs.
Okay. All in favor of introducing the item? Does anybody have any questions for Councillor Filion on this item? Seeing none. Councillor Filion, did you want to speak further to it, or?
No, it's just I'm just introducing the staff recommendations. It's a pretty straightforward item.
Okay. All those in favor of the recommendation and the item? And that
I'm sorry,
carries.
I got the issue mixed up. This is not the this is a different property, so I misstated. But again, it's all fine. It's just correcting a previous report that went through related to some renovations that are taking place.
This is the Shining Through Center for Children with Autism. Yeah.
Right.
Perfect. Okay. All in favor? And that item carries. We will now go back to our first item.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, both of the delegated items here, we have no speakers on them. We have no motions requested to adjourn any parts of it.
Okay.
So yeah, both are here to.
Perfect. So I have. Let me just go back to the beginning of my sheet. So our first public hearing is GL 24.1, apportionment of property taxes for June 29th, 2021. It is a public hearing with no deputations. We have a motion recommendation before us. Can I have somebody move the recommendation? Speaker Nunziata, all in favor? Carried. And number 2 is the cancellation, reduction, or refund of property taxes as of June 29th, 2021. It's a public hearing. There's no registered deputants. We do have a recommendation before us. If somebody can move the recommendation. Councillor Mantas, all in favor? And that carries. And our next order of business is number 5. Annual update on Omers as it relates to the city's employer contributions. We have one registered speaker. Sorry, just a moment. We have one registered speaker, Mr. Fred Hahn from QP Ontario. Matthew, is Mr. Hahn on the line?
To the chair, they are. I am now unmuting their mic.
Okay. Morning, Mr. Hahn. You have 5 minutes to make a presentation to the committee. The way it works, so you have 5 minutes to speak to the committee. Any member of the committee can ask you questions for up to 5 minutes. We then have a presentation from 2 Omers representatives They're making a presentation of the committee. After that, members of the committee have up to 5 minutes to ask questions of staff, and then we each have individually 5 minutes to speak to this item. So you have 5 minutes to speak. You can start whenever you're ready.
Thanks very much. Good morning. My name is Fred Hahn. Along with being a resident of the City of Toronto, I'm also the president of QP Ontario. And like the City of Toronto, QP Ontario is a sponsor of the Omers pension plan. We actually represent 125,000 members in that plan, 45% of the active plan members. Now, Omers isn't just an important pension plan for QP members living in the City of Toronto, it's important for the city itself. Defined benefit pension plans, like Omers, are not only the most meaningful form of retirement income security for workers, they're also the most cost-effective and efficient pension plans, and they serve as an important human resources recruitment and retention tool. A 2013 study by Boston Consulting, conducted on behalf of Canada's large defined benefit pension plans, including Omers, showed that defined benefit plans also contribute billions each year to local economies and to tax bases. And it might feel like a relief for some of you to have seen the report. I'm sure that's part of this. That shows that there are no further contribution increases needed this year to support this important pension plan. But as a recent report by QP Ontario shows, a report verified by a well-respected third-party actuarial firm, QBI Consulting, there are some real reasons for the City of Toronto to be very concerned about Omers, particularly its underperformance in investment returns. Omers anticipates that 70% of the pensions it pays out to members don't come from contributions. They come from interest and things earned on investments. If investment returns are not what they could or should be, there will be upward pressure on contribution rates, both for members and employers. There will also be pressure to reduce plan benefits on a go-forward basis. Sponsors like QP Ontario and the City of Toronto have a shared interest in ensuring that Omers has a strong investment performance. And to be blunt, they don't. Omers' 2020 returns were very bad. The plan returned a negative 2.7%. That, below zero, represents a loss of $3 billion. Now, Omers said that those poor returns in 2020 were due to the pandemic. But other large defined benefit pension plans and funds like HOOP, the Healthcare of Ontario pension plan, which QP Ontario also has members in, not only didn't lose, they performed very well in 2020. HOOP made 11.42% as an example. And all major pension plans ended with positive returns, except Omers. So QP Ontario looked into it, as a result of which we've issued a report, not just one bad year, that my office has forwarded along to every councillor on City Council. As the facts of our report detail, this is not the first time Omers investments have significantly underperformed other large defined benefit pension plans and funds. In fact, our report shows that on a 10-year basis, Omers returns significantly lagged those of others. This underperformance existed for a 10-year period before the pandemic. If Omers had simply performed in the mid-range of other large defined benefit pension plans and funds over the last 10 years, it would be approximately $28 billion more in assets, and the fund would be well over 100%, both on a smoothed and market basis. Instead, Omers remains in deficit, a deficit that will be worsened when their shockingly poor 2020 investment results are smoothed into the fund's status over the next 5 years. Our report also discovered that Omers investment returns now trail their own internal benchmarks over the last 5 and 10-year periods. QP Ontario also discovered that Omers has been failing to follow industry standard approaches in reporting comparisons of their long-term investment returns against their long-term benchmarks in their report to members. These are the facts. PBI actuarial consultants who looked at our report said the comparison made by QP is reasonable. They show that there's a significant gap in performance between Omers and other comparable pension plans and funds. In our opinion, the public information isn't able to explain the gap. We need to truly understand this performance between Omers and different comparable plans and funds. There ought to be an examination, which is why we have called for an independent expert review of Omers investment issues to be conducted by plan sponsors and shareholders. You can't fix the problem unless you acknowledge you have it. Now, I know I'm running short of time, so I just really want to invite you to join our call as a sponsor to have an expert review of the Omers investment performance led by sponsors and stakeholders. And we're happy to engage in longer conversations with any interested sponsor or stakeholder. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Hahn. Are there any questions for the Deputy Mayor Holiday?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Hahn, for speaking to us. Important issue, I think, for all employees, and I think this even affects councillors. You mentioned in your deputation today that Omers had deviated from, and I apologize, I'm looking down here because I'm reading my notes. They had deviated from following industry standards to report against benchmarks. Would you be able to elaborate a bit more on that to help me understand where things are different than what would be expected in the industry?
Certainly, and thanks for the question. What we discovered in doing this work by looking at other comparable sort of the big 8 pension funds and plans across the country is that all of them report annually to members, and part of those reports is a comparison against what they said is their internal benchmark. Omers used to do the very same thing. It stopped doing so in 2012. We weren't aware of that, actually, as a plan sponsor. In fact, we didn't discover that until we started to do this comparison with the reporting mechanisms of other plans and funds. We had to actually ask Omers for its internal benchmarks because they don't publish them. And they're considered confidential information so that while, you as a sponsor, we as a sponsor, we have folks who, of course, we entrust to go to Omers on our behalf and to do good work at the fund. They're aware of these things, but they're not able to tell us this information. It's considered confidential. So we asked Omers, and they did tell us and admitted when we met with them that they are behind their own internal benchmarks. This is actually quite a problem. Not only is it underperforming, it's underperforming, plans set their own benchmarks, and then they perform a particular way. And they often, of course, want to perform above their benchmark so they can say, look at the added value we have for managing the collective resources of the plan. Omers can't say that. And in fact, stopped telling plan members and sponsors in 2012 those comparisons. Every other major defined benefit pension plan and fund, this is a standard reporting mechanism.
May I also just ask, Mr. Chair, if I've got the time here with questions, are there any particular aspects about the fund's performance that need to be honed in on? I know the funds invest in all sorts of different areas. Is there something in the work that you've done that has specifically pointed to a certain spot that you think needs to be looked at more?
Thanks again for the question, and it's why we need a deeper dive review. What we did was compare publicly available information. All of the investment information is confidential to Omers, and we understand that. We're not investment experts, but here's what we know. Our members are part of other pension plans, not just here in Ontario, but across the country. We're a national union. This plan should at the least perform in the average of all of these other plans, and yet it has chronically, for a decade, underperformed. We have no idea what the situation, what's caused that. And we don't think Omers does either, because while they've said they've reviewed their performance, in fact, they've said publicly that they reviewed what they were doing and they're satisfied with their investment portfolio. Well, I'm not satisfied. And I don't think the City of Toronto, as a major sponsor of this plan, should be satisfied either. But to discover what's going on, somebody independent needs to go look and review and make some recommendations so that we can have a healthy, defined benefit plan like virtually every other one that Omers was compared against in our report.
Thank you, Mr. Hahn. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Holiday. Does Councillor Mantas, questions of the Deputy?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, Mr. Hahn. In terms of the independent review and stronger disclosure, how would this be conducted and by whom?
Well, what we'd like to do is work with other sponsors and stakeholders to determine who should appropriately do this review. And they would need to help us to determine how best to review the performance here, because I think it seems to us that there is clearly a problem in relation to the way in which collective resources are invested, but it also seems to us that there's a problem in reporting and accountability and in mechanisms, that it varies from other major pension plans and funds in the country. All of these things have impacts, we believe, for large sponsors like CUPE and the City of Toronto. And so, what we need is Omers to agree to participate in a review, because they hold all the information that's confidential. But we need to make sure that we can get to the bottom of whatever this concern is. And frankly, if in fact everything's fine, which I find hard to believe, I'm no investment expert, but when we compare to these other plans and we have so underperformed them, there has to be some kind of problem here. We believe that the only way to discover it, and frankly, PBI Consulting, who looked at our report, agreed that the only way to discover what the reasons might be for this gap is to have someone fully review the plan.
So, through you, Mr. Chair, in the sense of accountability, benchmarking, and in the name of transparency, what specifically would you and your members and the CUPE members be looking for?
Well, what we're looking for is an independent review of the investment performance of Omers. What this report demonstrates is that over a 10-year period, they've underperformed all of the other comparable major defined benefit pension plans and funds in the country. We want, not only to explain what might have happened, but to make changes to ensure that the plan is strong going forward for all of us, for all the members of the plan. It makes good sense. We think, there are other plans that have experienced challenges who have sought to ensure that there is a review of their operations to ensure that they are solid. This is exactly what Omers should be doing. In fact, what we're told by them is that they've done an internal review and everything's okay. And, from our perspective, that seems as though people who have been in charge and kind of, responsible for the investments of the collective resources of all of the plan members who have underperformed for this 10-year period simply aren't capable of discerning what the problem is. They're too close to it. They're in a bubble. Somebody needs to come and look at what's happened here and make some recommendations for those of us who are responsible for this plan, the sponsors, to ensure that it's strong going forward.
Mr. Chair, thank you, Mr. Hahn.
Thank you, Councillor Mantas. Are there other questions of the deputant? Seeing none. Mr. Hunt, CUPE, are you on the Sponsors Corp or the Admin Corp, or both?
We have seats at both of the corporations. We have 2 seats on sponsors and 2 seats on the Admin Corp based on our size in the plan.
Okay. And then I know you've done a report outlining your concerns with Omers, and I have read it. Are you not getting any traction on the Sponsors Corp or the Admin Corp to do that review at the board level?
Well, just the other day, Omers held a sponsors and stakeholders meetings, and we learned that OPSFA, the Ontario Public School Boards Association, agrees with our call for an independent review. There was also a question from the Chief Communications Officer of the Waterloo Catholic Board about our review. The Toronto Police Association also asked questions about how Omers is going to respond to our review. We've been in touch with many other stakeholder organizations. There's some, sort of a management association in Ottawa, the CIPP, the ATU, Unifor, UFCW, a number of other unions that are not part of the official sponsors network, but that have plans, members in the plan. All of these folks have joined with us in terms of calling for a review. What we are trying to do is impress upon Omers the growing sense of urgency from all of us as plan sponsors to actually discern what's going on here, given their colossal underperformance over a decade.
Right. And I guess I'm just trying to understand that. So, like, you sit on the sponsors corp, for example, so they have a board of directors. And have you tabled this report at a board meeting and said, here we are, here's what our due diligence, this is what we've done independently. We think there's a concern that we as a board of directors need to ask for an independent review. Has anything like that been done, or are you're just trying to, at this point, just trying to gather support from other board members? I'm trying to understand where you are with what you're doing.
No, and I appreciate the question because it does seem strange, doesn't it? Immediately upon Omers announcing their investment results in February, we convened a meeting of what we call the employee side group of sponsors. So it's basically the union side of the sponsors table. We talked to folks about what we had all just heard. We suggested to other union sponsors that we do this work and that we communicate directly with Omers as a group. During that sponsors meeting, where sponsors and stakeholders were presented with results, I immediately, on behalf of our union as a sponsor, in front of everyone, asked for this kind of a review. I asked for a designated special meeting to talk about investments that all of us could be part of. What the plan said was no, that was not necessary. And what they agreed to do was individual meetings with individual sponsors. We had one of those individual meetings, but we went to the other union sponsors. We are now in the process of trying to meet with employer sponsors. We've talked with AMO. We will be talking with public school board folks. We will be talking with other employers, because regardless of our potential differences of opinion about details in the plan, the one thing that we believe we all share in common is a desire to ensure that the plan is strong. Sadly, the other unions who are part of this employee association, while they seemed open to this idea and in fact supportive of it when we initially met, over the course of 2 weeks, one by one communicated that they were no longer interested. Okay, at some point we can't make other people participate, but what we had to do in due diligence for our members, the 125,000 of them that are in this plan, many of them employees of the City of Toronto, was proceed. And we've shared this with all of them. We've shared it with, we've shared this with everyone, and we've asked everyone to be part of this process. We have not yet heard back from any of the official employee sponsors, but we're continuing to talk to folks because we think it's just too important to wait.
Right. But you haven't tabled a motion at the board to say, we've done this independent report, yay or nay to telling the Omers plan to conduct an independent review.
Sadly, I'm not allowed to know what our representatives do, either at the sponsors or at the admin corps. We've shared this information with them. We've asked them to do their due diligence as representatives on those boards. But everything that happens at those boards, as I'm sure you now know, is completely confidential. And so I have no flippant idea what they've done. Sorry, that does bug me a bit.
That's okay.
I've got to say. So I'm sure our representatives who are diligently there to ensure the plan is strong and doing their job. I'm sure they've done what they've done, and I'm sure they're doing great work there. I just don't know what they've done. But that said, we've had discussions with the plan, with many of the folks who are on the line here today, asked for them to have, we also talked directly with the CEO of both boards, with the board chair, with like all of these folks. We've made these direct requests, and all we get is everything's fine. We're all good. And sorry, we just think there's too much at risk to assume that that's okay.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Hun. Are there any other questions from members of the Committee of the Deputant? Seeing none, Mr. Hun, thank you very much. We really appreciate your time this morning and coming in and making a deputation. It's much appreciated. Have a great day.
That. Thank you.
Okay. And at this point, we have next we have a presentation from our two Omers representatives, Mr. Joe Panichetti and Mr. David Beattie, who are the city's representatives on Omers. Joe and David, you're up.
Good morning, Councillor Ainsley, Mr. Chair, and all of the committee. And On behalf of David and myself as your reps, thank you for the opportunity to be with you this morning to provide this annual update. And of course, it's been 2 years since last year in the middle of wave 2, we weren't able to follow up with you. I want to let you know that over and above David and myself, who will give the presentation, we have 5 other staff and CEO available for questions later. From the SC Corporation, the CEO, Michael Roland, Pierre Cote, who's the stakeholder relations representative from SC, from AC, from the Administration Corporation, Jonathan Simmons, the Chief Financial Officer and Strategy Officer, Celine Chiavati, the Senior VP for Pension and Corporate Services, and Catherine Preston, the Vice President of Sustainable Investing. Hopefully we can...
Sorry, Joe. Just before you start, I just wanted to ask, within your presentation, is there an explanation of the difference between the Sponsors Corp and the Admin Corp?
Yes.
There is? Okay, perfect.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt.
And I probably shouldn't have used the short form, but that's what we do. But as per this agenda item, Councillor, the first couple of items I will cover off on background on the membership. And to your point, the role of AC and SC, I'll be clear on that for members of the committee. David will then cover the administration update, AC update, and cover in specifics the 2020 results. And finally, I'll close off with the Sponsors Corporation update for you. So that's the agenda, and I'll move very quickly to not hold up the committee. Background demographics for Omers, 526,000 total members, almost 300,000 active, 180,000 and growing fast retired. And the City of Toronto, about 25,000 active members within the City Corporation itself, which represents about 8.6% of total active members. I should note, and I know that your report from staff also highlight that if you included agencies and corporations, there would be an additional almost 15,000 active members, or about 5% additional representation at the city. Moving on to the next slide. In terms of the role, your question, Councillor Ainsley, the role of AC and SC directors. And I should back up for newer members and a reminder to all committee members that the province set up this bicameral structure, if you will. As you know, it's not common. We have 2 boards at Omers. And as outlined here, equal representation of employers and employees, as Mr. Hahn, I think, touched on. And you see the membership there. AC, in terms of the board itself, is clearly an independent board and has an independent chair, again, as set up by the province. And importantly, is comprised of skills-based members who provide oversight over the plan administration. They collect the contributions, they pay the pensions under this board and under the staff administration. And of course, importantly, investing plan funds and preparing and setting assumptions for actuarial valuations. Those are the 3 key areas for Administration Corporation. On the Sponsors Corporation side that I'm involved with, again, equal representation by employers and employees. And the 3 key responsibilities are the appointments for both boards are recommended and approved at the SC. The pension benefits and the contribution rates are all set at SC. And just a quick note that as of January 1st, 2021, the board has changed its setup in terms of chair. We used to have a co-chair model that had 1 employer rep and 1 employee rep, and we now have a chair and vice chair model. And I'll get to that in a few slides later. At a very high level, our strategic plan in 2020, both AC and SC worked jointly on, call it a One Omers 5-year strategic plan. going out to 2025. Here are the priorities. I will start by saying we have a very important Omers value proposition. Call it a mission statement that is very clear, and we refer to it at every meeting, that we want to provide sustainable, affordable, and meaningful pension plan for our members. And the priorities are there. Plan design, obviously a very important key priority, evolving Omers offering to meet stakeholders and sustainability needs. Funding, managing the funding, the asset liability levers, very complex, but of course very important to the plan itself and the financial health of the plan. Investment, of course, as part of that funding, maintaining a diverse investment portfolio that David will go into detail on to ensure we meet our risk return hurdles. Also, important in our updated plan was improving our stakeholder trust and understanding, and finally advancing our operational capabilities, especially with technology, and trying to work as closely as we can with our sponsors, stakeholders, and importantly, our members. I'll now turn it over to David Beattie to provide the overview of the 2020 results.
Thank you very much, Joe. My name is David Beattie, and I've been a city resident for 60 of my 63 years. The other years were in Cambridge, in England, and at Harvard and Boston for my education. I've worked in the investment business for 35 years in a variety of roles, and I've been a very active participant on the investment committee and the board of AC and the Human Resource Committee for the past 9 years. I feel it's my role to represent all 526,000 plan members, not a more narrow parochial interest. Today, I'm going to review the investment results and the impact on plan funding. We're about 6 months after the year end. These results have been shared widely with stakeholders, sponsors, and other members. I'll also provide an overview of the key points covering the ground that you might have read about in the annual report or heard at the Omers annual meeting. The chart I'm showing now is a history of the Omers funded ratio over a 10-year period. So after the 09-08 crash, there obviously was a dramatic loss, and I'm proud to say that we have rebounded quite well over the last 8 or 9 years. The solid line shows the smooth value, which smooths investment returns over 5 years, and we now present this in our annual report. This is how we present it with the regulator as well. We smooth out to results to show a longer-term nature of the returns as opposed to one specific year and volatility. The blue line is the funded ratio on a fair market value. You can see it's choppier because of fluctuations in markets. But what you see over the long term is that the Omers funded ratio has been improving by both measures since a low point in 2012. 5 years after the great financial crisis was effectively our low point. I'd also point out that not only is our funded ratio improving, but we're using a lower discount rate, which is more conservative, and it reduces, it makes the plan more resilient over time to funding risks. So you've gone from a plan that was 86% funded after certain contribution holidays 20 years ago to a plan that with this year's returns is going to be close to 100% funded. Let me focus on the last two data points, 2019 and 2020. So Omers funded ratio on a smooth basis remains at 97%, consistent with last year. On a fair market value basis, it dipped from 101%. So we were into the overfunding stage last year, back down to 93 because our return fell short of the discount rate. The primary plan at year end 2020 had $105 billion worth of assets, paid pension benefits of $5.1 billion to more than 180,000 members, and the pensions are paid on time, and as usual, they will be again in 2021. Certainly, 2020 was a very challenging year for Omers. The investment return of the primary plan net of expenses was negative 2.7. Now, just to give it a little historical perspective in markets, and you know, I've lived through the 87 crash, the tech crash, long-term credit management, the 08 crash, the taper tantrum of 2013. We've had 4 of the last 20 years where we've had a negative return. This is actually only the 3rd worst one. There have been 2 years where it was considerably worse. Our plan has an established benchmark for 2020 of 6.9%. We're neither pleased, neither management nor the board are pleased with this result, but we took concrete steps to improve that. The 3 main factors that explain the performance gap relative to the benchmark are much of it came, almost half of it came from real estate and private equity portfolios, which represent about 30% of the overall portfolio. Lockdowns and restrictions from the COVID pandemic impacted many of our consumer and business-facing investments. We had empty shopping malls at Yorkdale, Square One, and Scarborough Town. We had empty theater chains in England, Italy, Germany, and Poland. About 20% of the gap also came from sector allocation within public equities. Omers buys blue chip, high dividend paying stocks, a number of them in financial services and energy utility businesses. Value investments generally lost ground in 2020 and did not recover until the later part of that year. We've seen a much more improved situation so far in 2021. Another 20% of the gap came from currency. What happens in a crisis, and I've seen it half a dozen times, and I was a foreign exchange trader at Citibank, is that there is a flight to quality. Everyone buys the US dollar. So you literally, between about the 26th of February and the 8th of March, you had the Canadian dollar drop precipitously. And we immediately took a number of proactive steps to protect the fund's liquidity against this move. But, you know, there were warnings from the Bank of Canada it could go to 165. The prudential actions we took achieved the objectives. They resulted in some currency losses after the Canadian dollar appreciated once we reduced our hedges. It's noteworthy that currency hedging boosted returns by 3% in 2019, and over a multi-year period, there have been years where the returns have benefited from this hedging, and there are years when it does not. Ironically, all 3 of these areas, exposure to private assets, a disciplined commitment to blue chip, high dividend paying stocks, and a long established practice of hedging in order to reduce the impact of the movement, served the plan for many years very well. Last year, it did not work out as we had hoped. There's also some good news worth noting. Actions by the investment teams have reduced expenses and conserved cash. The credit portfolio experienced no material borrower defaults. We sold our hotel chain, Banff Springs, Lake Louise, Jasper Park Lodge, and the Whistler Hotel to the Singaporean fund and reduced or insulated us from heavy losses in that sector. Before the pandemic, we made a substantial investment in industrial and fulfillment center real estate, both in Europe, in North America, and in Asia. It's been extremely lucrative. We have increased the Asian equity exposure, and we have the largest venture capital fund and growth equity fund in the country, and that perform very well. Since the year end, many of our core private equity portfolio valuations are now back to pre-pandemic levels. Looking at expenses, investment expenses were down sharply, helped by actions that were taken to reduce costs, lower travel, lower meals by the pandemic. The biggest driver, however, is lower management compensation due to the lower returns. Driving this drove a decrease in the management expense ratio, MER, from 67 basis points to 38. What does this all mean to members? Pensions have and will continue to be paid, and contribution rates and benefits remain unchanged in 2020 and can be maintained until 2024. A few notes on how Omers is positioned for the future. Our credit ratings are strong. We have AAA credit ratings from two of the agencies, the highest achieved, and very high ratings from two others. Omers ratings are 1 to 3 notches above the province and the city, depending on the rating agency. We have very, very low debt at the fund and plan level. Omers is very well capitalized with ample liquidity to invest in global opportunities. We brought in a new senior management team as of January. This pulls together leaders from across our organization. The new team brings deep experience from both inside and outside Omers, from 35 different companies in 11 industries, with multiple countries represented, perspectives, and backgrounds. It achieves much greater gender diversity. The management and board are confident in the ability of this team to deliver value to the members. The composition of Omers management and boards as it stands in 2021. You can see here that the Omers management has had increased percentage of women. The Omers executive team has seen a significant jump over the last 2 years. The administration board has increased. The sponsors corporation board, sadly, is unchanged. Looking ahead, a number of stakeholders have asked whether Omers would publish returns more frequently than annually. I'm pleased to advise that we recently approved a mid-year update of key financial indicators, and that update is expected in mid-August, and the outlook is favorable. In the meantime, I can say that the management and board are encouraged by the progress since the figures of December 31st. Sustainable investment. Key messages here. We made a commitment to reduce the carbon intensity across the entire portfolio by 20% by 2025. We are a leader and a sponsor in sustainable investing. ESG is ingrained in the Omers culture. All investments are run through an ESG lens, and I can tell you after 180 investment committee meetings, it is significantly looked at. We integrate it to assess both value and risk. We adhere to the following 4 principles. 1, integration of ESG factors into investment decision-making. Engagement of portfolio companies to promote sustainable business practices. Collaboration with like-minded institutions to amplify our voice, and adaptation to a rapidly evolving landscape. The commitment isn't just about divesting fossil fuels, which we have done. It is an integrated approach across all Omers and Oxford portfolios, and we're doing what is in the plan and the members' best interests. So at this point, I'm going to turn it back to Joe for the Sponsors Corporation update, please.
Thanks, David. The next slide, 14 there, again, a reiteration of what I covered earlier in terms of the role of Sponsors Corporation, appointing all board members, reviewing and approving any changes and benefits, and the same for contributions. I'd like to highlight, though, the important piece of appointments. And since I've been your representative from 2016 on, the update of and replacement of any board member, be it on SC or AC, but importantly on AC, we developed over the last 5 or 6 years a very strong competency framework and ensuring that the skill sets needed on both boards are there, most especially, of course, with the Administration Corporation. And quite frankly, David Beattie, who you just heard from, was one of the first appointees from Toronto that had the full skill sets needed at the AC. And since that time, all the appointments by SC, we've ensured that benchmark, if you will, with the huge skill set that David has is embodied within AC. The next slide is just an update in terms of the SC board positions that were changed as of 2021. We have updates on an annual basis, but there was a significant review effective January 1st, 2021. We switched from a co-chair model, I referred to this earlier, to a chair and vice chair model. And of course, the chair, vice chair, no different than your committee, is the norm. And we finally have made that change, and our newly appointed chair is Frank Romanano, who you know well as the Toronto Professional Firefighters Association head for a number of years and represents the Ontario Professional Firefighters Association at Omers. So he was appointed as the first chair, and Barry Brown is representing AMO as the vice chair. And you will note the chairs of committees are represented by a wide spectrum of our sponsors: education, police, children's aid societies, and municipalities, with me as the chair of the audit committee. Next slide highlights Sponsors Corporation priorities. I could spend many hours on this slide, but suffice to say that as of 2021, there are 5 priorities that we're focusing on related to 2021 and 2022. But the information has been shared with all sponsors. I'll just highlight a couple of the key areas. In terms of engagement, it's our continuing priority to improve stakeholder trust and understanding. And the second point I want to highlight is the plan risk assessment. The SC will be undertaking a complete plan risk assessment review over the next 18 months to consider the importance of sustainability for our strategic priorities and value, our mission, and the need for any future changes to ensure that sustainability. As you know, we've already communicated many of these changes that you would have seen in the past months. In terms of 2021 plan change proposals, I mentioned just now about the SC is commencing a plan risk assessment review over the next 18 months. So these 5 2021 plan change proposals came forward from members and sponsors in 2020. And they basically, as you can see, they cover 2 main categories. The first 3 are the conversion of NRA 60 to 65 plans, and they're fairly detailed plan design changes that, in a nutshell, are we're reviewing because we want to ensure any transition occurs in a fair manner to all members. And the last two deal with the methodology for determining contribution rates for NRA 60 plan. And again, it's a very specific plan design adjustments that we want to take our time on. But ultimately, to prevent rushing to a solution on these 5 plan changes and approving changes that may be incompatible with the outcome of the plan risk review over the next 18 months, the SC board just last week decided to suspend the plan change process. All that means is that we're deferring these 5 proposals to be folded into the plan risk assessment review over the next 18 months. That, to us, was the best way to handle all plan change proposals at once. And final slide, the actuarial valuation, Omers annually decides on filing the actuarial valuation. This year, the sponsors board decided to file the December 31st, 2020 actuarial valuation to the province. This valuation shows the current contribution rates, I want to be clear on, are sufficient to cover the minimum funding requirements for the next 3 years. Mr. Chair, that's the end of our presentation. Apologies if we've gone over the normal time. And we're available for questions, David, myself, and the 5 other staff.
Okay. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, David. Appreciate your presentation this morning. Questions of the deputants? Any questions of the deputants? Councillor Mansis?
For you, Chair Ainsley, to Mr. Beatty. Good morning, sir. As the fund showed an underperformance of 2.7%, do you find that is Omers taking a more conservative risk approach compared to the other 7 or the Maple 8 pension funds?
Councillor Mantis, thank you very much for your question. It is difficult to ascertain exactly that the risk of a portfolio would be measured by what is called a beta, the amount of volatility that the portfolio shows. Historically, very consciously, in 2013 and over the last 9 years, as we had a 14 or 15% funding gap to refill, we consciously took a less risky, less volatile approach to our investing style. That included owning outright Oxford properties. It delivered a beautiful 10, 12% return consistently through the piece. It involved owning substantial. We had one of the first world-class infrastructure investment entities called Borealis, which became Omers Infrastructure. You know, it delivers 8 to 9%, sometimes 10 to 12 on an asset sale, but has been an extraordinarily good, steady, consistent performer. Within our fixed income portfolio, it's really hard to meet a 6.9 benchmark if you're buying 1% Government of Canada or US Treasury bonds. It just, right, the yields went to 50 basis points after the crash. That move down gave a number of funds very substantial gains, right? If they own Canada bonds or US Treasury bonds, Hoop and Canada Pension Plan specifically had some spectacular returns, which have since reversed as the yields have come back up to 1.5%. We are very open about what we invest in, what our portfolio construction is. Just want to make a couple of comments on the comments made previously. The 10-year period is a cherry-picked period of time. Over 3 and 5 years, we have 8 and 8.5% returns, and we stand 4th out of 10 pension funds. The number of funds and which funds to compare us to was also cherry-picked, right? Independent actuarial consultant was taken. And finally, it's very difficult. The Canada Pension Plan just posted some spectacular numbers, right? From the 1st of April, after the 30-40% crash, straight up for a year, which the markets have done. You know, I can tell you our returns in that same period were well in excess of 15 to 17%. Okay, so you got to be really, really careful, and it's an area of expertise. You can't just cherry pick the period, cherry pick the funds, you know, cherry pick the actual year ends. You know, there was a lot of hyperbole used. Strange, shocking, very bad. Our returns are frankly right in the middle of the properly selected pack. And it was done consciously because we wanted less volatility and beta as we cautiously rebuilt the funding ratio. So we'll see what the numbers say in August. You know, we're in June, but I think we are in a much better position, certainly, than we were 7 or 8 years ago. And this cherry picking of funds and returns is not appropriate in my view. We have seen a consistent basis. I consciously said I represent all Omers members, right? I don't represent a management side or a union side or somebody's political interest. We see that, you know, everything is fine is incorrect. I said we're very unhappy with what happened, but we reacted to it. We changed some people. You know, there's a new CEO in. He's brought in his team. There've been the independent board, as designed by the Dean report of 2012. You got George Cook. George Cook is a superb chairman, on a par with Jim Pippoleto, who I worked with at the National Ballet, who chaired RBCDS, who chaired the Sick Kids. And then you've seen a systematic building of the skills, people with portfolio management skills, you know, the guy that ran all corporate investment banking at the Bank of Montreal, you know, some really, really high, the infrastructure, power and utility guy from the Bank of Commerce. Some really great people have been brought in. I can tell you for sure, those are highly independent people that looked at this, and we did make changes. You know, 3 or 4 heads effectively rolled in capital markets and private equity especially, and we made overall changes with a much more dynamic and effective team, I believe. Thank you. I have to get that off my shoulders.
Thank you, Mr. Beatty. No more. Basically, we've changed management, and we're just looking to see what the new management's going to do in the forthcoming year. I mean, they're just new. They've just been elected in January, as you said.
Yeah. Now, you know, Blake Hutchison, who is the CEO, was CEO of Oxford Properties for a decade and delivered some great returns. There was an orderly transition from Michael Latimer to Blake. Jonathan, who's online, the CFO, has done a great job, I think, for the whole period that I've been involved with. There have been some new people brought in at the chief investment officer level in individual silos. They're very experienced, highly capable people, and the proof will be in the returns. You're correct.
Now, are we going to be increasing the benchmark going forward as from what it is today?
The the benchmark in and around 7% meets the pension promise, right?
Yeah.
The reality is today we're close to 100% funded. We'd like to get that up to 105 or 110 to have some cushion in case when the inevitable next event occurs. Relative to our discount rate, you want to lower the discount rate and increase the investment returns so that you don't have to change either contributions or the nature and form of people's pensions. So it's not realistic when interest rates are 1.5% on looking at my screens, 1.49 on a 10-year treasury, be a little lower in Canada. And when people reasonably expect public equity markets to earn 7, right? We're getting 8, 9, 10s out of the private investment classes. So that's Oxford, that's actively managed, 2,000 employees. That's the 100 people from Melbourne or from Sydney, Australia to Singapore to Toronto, New York, and London in infrastructure. And then the same kind of thing in private equity, which is principally Europe and North America, with some small investments in Southeast Asia, and South Asia being India. But it's hard to push those returns, much above 7, 8, 9%, but that is enough in an absolute basis to meet the pension promise to the 500,000 members.
But when you see the differences, because all members are going to see their statements, and if they see this report and they see a larger difference from the other pension funds in the rate of return, do you think that is it the fact that the other pension funds might be using a different style or have a different asset allocation in the mixture of their portfolios that have given them the larger returns?
The answer is yes. You're correct. The Canada Pension Plan would be 85% equity and equity-related investments, and about 15% in fixed income or dividend paying. We have a more conservative approach. It has more dividend paying stocks. It has our chief investment officer finds it very difficult to buy a technology stock at 50 times revenue. It may have a $20 billion or $50 billion market cap in the US, but it's sort of a greater fool theory. You got to assume somebody's going to pay you 55 times revenue.
Right.
Historically, Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds. If you haven't read it, it's Dutch flip bulb craze, the South Sea bubble. These things happen in markets, and that technology and growth stocks are as overvalued in comparison to growth stocks as we've seen in a decade. Our portfolio is coming back this year very nicely.
Thank you, Mr. Beatty.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Councillor Mantas. Other questions of the deputants? Councillor Holiday, Deputy Mayor Holiday. Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. I believe my question is to Mr. Beatty. Mr. Beatty, thank you for your earlier answer where you had mentioned that it's really important when comparing funds to look at different time periods and look at them all. I think you were to use the word cherry pick, but I would just say, increase your horizon. If members of the committee wanted to sort of dig into this a little bit more over time, do you have advice for us about the different things that we should consider when we're comparing the different funds? I know there's all kinds of things, right? There's the performance over time, and sometimes I think you even have 20 years on your site. But I think there's expenses, there are asset mixes, there's some statements in terms of risk. I mean, I know when I go to the bank, they give you kind of a menu of different things that you can invest in, and they all have different risk profiles, right? any sort of base, I'm not trying to become a financial analyst. That's not what I do here, but to be an informed reader, is there anything that you would suggest to us that would help us sift through this information? And if we're having conversations with staff, what are the questions we should ask?
The most important thing is the fund able to meet the pension promise and the liabilities that we have? And the answer is absolutely yes, and it will continue to be so. We have a very long time horizon, Art. We literally talk on our board about 20, 30, and 50-year time horizons. So we have an enormous investment in multi-billion dollar, and we just added $1 billion to it, in wind farms and solar in the South and the Southwest United States. With the current heat wave, they'd be performing beautifully right now. That platform is scalable across the whole continent. In terms of individual items, what I might suggest, Deputy Mayor, is that at some point you talk to Jonathan Simmons, our Chief Financial Officer. He has been the in-house expert on a number of those comparative figures. Honestly, I'm not the guy to do that. So I'm sure somebody on the line can give you Jonathan's contact. If not, I can flip you his V card.
Jonathan, can you jump in?
Sure. Deputy Mayor, I think your question was focused on, what should you, as a member of council, be asking of staff when you look at performance. The most fundamental thing to remember is that Omers is not an investment fund; it's a pension plan, and I make that very subtle difference time after time again. And by that, here's what I mean. Omers not only has a large portfolio of investments, but it also has a large portfolio of liabilities. And whenever you're asking the question about the performance of a pension plan, it is absolutely critical to look at the liabilities. What is the structure of the liabilities? What is the longevity experience of the various cohorts? When are they retiring? And that is absolutely critical. At Omers, we've got some very, very important things that we're facing right now. Longevity is increasing. In G7 countries like Canada, human longevity has increased by 3 months every year for the past 120 years. We're very, very conscious of that. And we're very, very conscious of retirement. The baby boom is going through its retirement right now. And what that means for Omers is that there will be very large demands for cash from the pension plan over the next 10 years as the next wave of boomers move through. So when you look at the liabilities, that takes you down to what is the funding requirement. At Omers, we call that the discount rate. One of the things which I think is very important is Omers has a discount rate on its liabilities today, 3.85%. That's 40 basis points lower than it was 5 years ago. And we have to drive that discount rate down. And Omers needs to earn investment returns above that discount rate. Omers' 10 years performance against that discount rate is 6.7%. The discount rate is 5.85. And so what you see there is a margin where Omers' investments have outperformed that discount rate requirement. That is the comparison that in my mind is the most important one to make. What is the investment performance relative to the liabilities? And that, sir, I think is the question that you should come back to time and time again. How is the plan liquidating its liabilities? Hope that helps.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I don't have the clock in front of me. If I may ask one other question. And I guess
Go ahead,
I will.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. I'll open it up to any of the Omers staff that that is appropriate to answer. But there are a number of sustainable investing policies right across the board. have they made things harder? Any changes recently made things harder? Or are they different than any of the other plans? So to me, that seems to be a factor that may shape the outcomes, and maybe not. I'd take your comments on it.
Catherine, can you jump in?
I sure can. Thank you for the question, Councillor Holiday. So I've heard reference on this call to the Maple 8, which were the big public sector plans across Canada. This is one area where we're all very aligned in how we're thinking about environmental, social, governance issues and how we invest across portfolios. And in fact, we have a group where we meet regularly and talk about what each plan is doing and how we can advance things to move things forward, because we all have the belief and understanding that any company that we invest in, if they don't manage these things well, they won't perform well over the long term. So with that understanding, how we may differ than some of our peers is we did take a big commitment last year to make the public commitment to reduce the carbon intensity of the portfolio 20% in the next 5 years. So we did a carbon footprinting exercise to look at all the entities that Omers invests in, the carbon or greenhouse gases being emitted that contribute to climate change. What does the portfolio look like through that lens? Where are these emissions? And then what are we going to do about it? So that exercise helped us see where these emissions are. And it's not just fossil fuel companies, it's utilities, it's cement, it's industrial manufacturing. So a much broader spectrum than where the conversation focuses around fossil fuels, to see where the carbon is and then make a commitment to reduce it over time. Because the levers we have at our disposal are capital allocation, where money, and then what to do with the assets that we're invested in now, and how can we talk to them about reducing their carbon footprint and the impacts of climate change that they're contributing to over time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Holiday. Other questions for the deputants? Speaker Nunziata.
Question. Joe, when you did your presentation, if you can just clarify, you mentioned Banff Springs and Lake Louise. So can you just clarify that? Well, I'm familiar with those two locations. I'm just asking the question. What did you do?
David, why don't you? David probably should answer.
You sold the Banff Springs Hotel in Lake Louise?
I could answer, Councillor, Madam Speaker. I could answer it, but I think David is the appropriate person on that investment.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Nunziata. Yes, we had a very successful investment in a chain of the Western Fairmont hotels that a lot of us have had the privilege of visiting or walking around at Lake Louise. So there's Lake Louise, Banff Springs, Jasper Park Lodge, and I believe the Fairmont Whistler. We sold 3/4 of it. So we sold 75% to one of the largest Singaporean government investment funds. They closed on the deal in April as true gentlemen after the pandemic and crisis had already hit. So it was extremely good timing. The process was initiated in the fall of 19. An auction effectively was run by the agents, and we selected, fortunately, a very good partner. We still retained 25%, but interestingly, the only thing that people could travel to or be open, the remaining 25%, people could drive to those hotels. So we still had a baseline. It wasn't like the shopping malls and the theater chains, which were completely shut. But I forget the exact number. I think we recorded a gain of $400 or $500 million selling our 3/4. So sad to see them go. I spent 3 summers working in Jasper. but it was absolutely the right thing for the fund, and it was extraordinary. I believe it was GIC, the Government Investment Corporation of Singapore, that closed on it.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Welcome.
Thank you, Speaker Nunziata. Other questions of the deputants? Seeing none. So I don't know if this one's for David or Joe. So my table napkin math, if I look at 2017 to 2020, the net absolute return was 5.6%, which was below Omer. I believe Omer's target for that period worked out to 7.2%. And then maybe it is for David. So David, in your comments a few moments ago, you said that Omers was making its pension payments. But if I look at the math that I've scribbled, when you talk about current pension payments, they're not coming from investment returns. They're being done by employee contributions. So instead of my employee contributions being invested, they seem to be being used to pay retiree pensions. Is my math off?
The nature of investing is that, we have, whether it be economic cycles or exogenous shocks, the Gulf War, the tech crash, the extraordinary 87 crash. So there are going to be periods of time, there have been 4 years in the last 20, where we've had a negative return. And in that specific year, yes, your comment is somewhat relevant. But over the entire period of 20 years, the returns of the fund, and there were lots of years where it was 10, 11, and 12% with a very low beta. And you can see that we earned more on investments than we paid out in pensions because the funded ratio went from 86 to 101. It dipped last year. It's come back pretty significantly in the first 6 months. So in any individual year, it's possible that you lag either the discount rate or the required return to pay that year's pensions, but there's tremendous liquidity in our fund. We have a AAA credit rating, virtually untapped debt facilities with the banks in the commercial paper market, with the midterm note program that Jonathan put in place, and then just straight up liquid assets that we hold. There's around $10 billion worth of highly liquid things that more than cover the fund. So again, we look at returns on a 10, 20, 30-year basis, which is the kinds of liabilities we have for those retirees. In an individual year, it could dip below.
So David, could you tell me currently what percentage of current pension payments are from investment returns as opposed to employee contributions? And if you don't have it, if you can send it to me.
Yeah, I'll have to confer with Jonathan and we'll get it to you, Chairman.
Okay, I'd appreciate that. And then my next question has to do with, I guess, governance or board governance, which I'm learning a lot more about. And I don't know if this is a Joe or a David question. So you have the sponsor corp and you have the admin corp. And I was kind of surprised. So Michael Rowland, he's the sponsor corp CEO, and he sits on the admin corp as well. So I assume he's being paid by both?
No, sorry, Councillor. Michael Roland is CEO for the Sponsors Corporation, completely separate from the Independent Administration Corporation. So there's no crossover there. I think what you're probably alluding to, Michael used to be working with the Omers administration as a very senior executive, most especially in infrastructure. And Michael's retired, and he was an interim CEO, and now moving forward is the potential for an appointment as longer term appointment as CEO of SC. So bottom line is completely separate, no crossover with administration corporation, separate governance.
So is it just so, Joe? If I look at the Omers website for the leadership team, it has Michael listed as President and Chief Operating Officer, Asia Pacific Region.
Okay, I mean,
he's
Michael's online.
Position.
Michael's online, but that's an old position. And maybe Michael, you should jump in to clarify. But the bottom line is Michael's no longer in that position, Councillor. That if it's on the website right now, it's outdated.
So the website's, it lists him, Michael Rowland, President and Chief Operating Officer, Asia Pacific Region. And then it lists him as the Chief Executive Officer of the Sponsors Corporation.
Yeah. For a minimum amount of time, that was the case. He was in effect an interim CEO while he was still finishing up at the admin corporation. As of today, he is no longer involved in any way administratively or governance-wise with the administration corporation. But Michael's on the line. Michael, you want to jump in?
I don't think I have anything else to add other than the website is out of date. I had some function and roles to complete off in Asia in the beginning part of this year, so it probably stayed on the website, but my role is 100% dedicated to the SC. I was historically on the executive team of the AC since 2007, but that has ceased, and I'm fulfilling my role 100% of my time dedicated to the SC.
Okay. Good morning, Michael. And sorry, when did you retire from the AC?
The final paperwork was done in the beginning of April of this year, end of April this year, is when all that took place.
Okay. All right.
But effectively, my role in acting in Asia has been very limited, given that the joys of COVID, you can't really do a role like that from remotely. And so it was slowing down. But I do have a few things that have to be cleaned up paper-wise, including finalizing the annual report for 2020, which is one of the things that's happening later today. But that's just administratively. I don't have any function on the day-to-day role in the AC. I don't attend any of their meetings. I don't participate in any way. It's all SC related.
Okay. You're not being compensated anymore by AC as of the end of April?
My compensation arrangements, I was an AC employee seconded to the SC, and my compensation exists through the AC till the end of this year, and then I'm no longer compensated. But I had my compensation, rather than transferring me between employed from the AC to the SC to the end of this year, it was found to be simpler to just leave me with one employee with 100% secondment to the SC. So that's what's taking place.
Okay. I'm just kind of, because when I read the report in 2020, you were paid $2.4 million by the AC.
That's correct. I was employee of the AC in 2020.
Okay. And so back to Joe and David, I'm trying to understand, how can Mr. Rowland be the president of the Sponsors Corporation and also work on the admin corporation?
Councillor Ainsley, I sit on the Human Resources Committee. Michael was absolutely instrumental in the creation and the founding of our Singapore and Melbourne offices. It involved dozens of flights, 18, 20 hours to Asia. It is now 15% of our fund, and it's been very successful and a cornerstone and will grow incrementally over the next decade. So kudos to Michael, and we thank him for that incredible effort. compensation at Omers has 3 or 4 components. One is someone's base salary, one is their bonus in a given year. Any short-term bonus, Michael would have got 0 on the management of the AC. A long-term bonus and the returns that Michael generated in Omers Infrastructure, now then called Omers Borealis, and the private equity groups, he was responsible for a good 30% of the Omers assets and investments, and there were exceptional returns. That is paid out over multiple years. So you've got great returns in 18 and 19, a base salary, and then probably about $2 million worth of a long-term bonus, which is directly comparable to people that work in private equity and infrastructure at a most senior level. We've had several people in Michael's group that have been cherry-picked away from us by Blackstone, BlackRock, and a number of those funds because they're of such high quality. And Michael led that team. He really formulated it and then formulated the stuff in Asia. It was not finished, so he had a few items to deal with there while managing full-time the sponsors corporation. But as he said, that ended in April. The comp will go on for another year.
Okay, all right. David, and while I have you, while I've got you in the hot seat, do you think the Omers boards have the expertise to effectively challenge management's performance as investment managers and pensioner administrators?
I've watched it evolve over the last 9 years. A big step was George Cook coming on in 2014 as the independent chair. A big change was a skills matrix that we put together, and we very specifically looked for people with investment expertise, governance expertise, frankly, venture capital and growth investment expertise, human resource management expertise. And you've seen increasingly competent people brought into the board. I think it's a material positive. It all stems from the Dean report. We are a strange creature of legislation. It's a bicameral board with these, normally you would have a nominating committee and some form of pension services committee, all on one board. Personally, I've been really impressed with the last half dozen directors I've seen come in. It is absolutely an independent board. It's people from major institutions with very substantial academic backgrounds that stand up, ask tough questions. We've turned down a couple of investments at that investment committee, or just said we don't think you should pursue that further. We're not shy to ask really tough questions, whether it's the currency policy, whether we want to invest in consumer-facing industries as much, or several of the other lessons. You can make mistakes, but if you don't learn from them, it's tough. The board is very independent and has asked those tough questions. And if you take a look at it, you got a new CEO that just came in. He brought in a team. It is much more diverse, gender and diversity. The CIO, Satish Rai, is of Indian background, South Asian background, and is the champion of that within the firm. And I absolutely believe, and I've seen it evolve over, as your rep, but looking at it on behalf, as a fiduciary on behalf of all 526,000, that it is independent, and that the quality of the people involved has materially improved.
Okay. All right. Thank you, David. And sorry, Joe, I just have, so Joe, you're the chair of the audit committee. I was just trying to understand as I look at and I raised this 2 years ago, the sponsor corp's operating expenses, they're up 40% over last year.
I don't believe that's correct, Councillor. 40% increase in expenses over last year. I believe our increase 21 over 20 was somewhere in the range of approximately 5%. I think there was some reference.
I mean, my math's off in.
No, I think what
statement of operations. It's 2019, 2.286 million, and then 2020, 3.470.
I'm going by memory, but I'm almost positive that our 21 to 20 was definitely 5%, and we have historically not had a kind of double-digit increase. It's always been more or less inflationary. I know to be frank, there every 3 years we have an adjustment for salaries. We have a third-party consultant that reviews the salaries for directors. And, those increases in effect are, maybe slightly above inflation based on the market and based on the third party review. But the 40% is a complete shock to me. I'm not sure of that number.
Because no offense, Joe, I got this like out of the report. I've been getting it out of the report every year. 2019. Omers Sponsor Corporation expenses for 2020, statement of operations, 2019, 2.286, 2020, 3.470.
Well, I apologize, Councillor. I'll have to double check that, and I'll get back to you.
Yeah. Roland, did you want to comment? Mr. Roland? Sorry, Michael.
That's okay. No, I will confirm with Joe as the chair, and then I'll come back to you to make sure we have 100% accuracy. I can pull it up, but it'll take me a minute or two, so I prefer to give it to Joe and come back to you. Thank you. Sorry.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you. Those are my questions for today. Speakers on this item? Anybody from the committee like to speak? Seeing none. I do have a motion that I would like to move.
Mr. Chair, just give us 1 second and we will display your motion on this item.
Yeah. And as always, I want to thank Mr. Beattie and Mr. Panichetti for coming in this morning. As the chair of the General Government Licensing Committee, we've asked our Omers reps to come in annually. I think it's important. Our two Omer reps are appointed by our city manager, and the City of Toronto, our agencies, boards and commissions, and our employees' contributions to Omers in 2020 were just over $700 million. In 2019, we paid a similar amount, and as the General Government Licensing, we've been taking an active interest in Omers and the financial commitment that they're making on behalf of our employees and the economic state that our city and its employers have as the largest employer in Omers. I'm proud to say the City of Toronto has led the way in terms of transparency and education of our role in Omers. So I'm putting forward the motion here before us as we continue to get financial clarity and transparency on our investments into Omers. So I'm moving the following motion, which is asking for further clarity and also some work on behalf of our staff as our Omers representatives continue to come in on an annual basis. And I hope the members of the committee will support my motion. If anybody has any questions from the committee, I'm prepared to answer them now. Seeing none, so I do have a motion before us. All in favor of the motion? And that carries. Item as amended. All in favor? And that carries. Thank you very much, Mr. Beatty, Mr. Panichetti. I appreciate your time this morning. Looking forward to seeing you again next year.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Matthew, do we have anything left?
Mr. Chair, we have a bill to confirm the two delegated items from earlier in the meeting that we will display shortly, and we can pass that bill in bylaw. Sorry, Mr. Chair, you can go ahead and take a motion to confirm the proceedings. Just give us 1 second. Sorry, 1 sec.
Yep, I'll wait till it's on the screen. Okay. Can I have somebody move the confirming bill on the screen? Sorry, I can't see anybody's hand. If somebody could vocally tell me.
Stephen Holiday here. Happy to move that, Mr. Chair. Do you need me to read it?
I don't believe so. Councillor Holiday is moving the confirming bill. All in favor? And that carries. And motion to adjourn. All in favor? That carries. Thank you, everybody. Really appreciate your time this morning, as always. And I hope everybody in your family stays safe and well. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone.